Princess Zarathel of the Veiltar Empire stood at the altar of the Great Hall, watching her new husband with barely hidden disappointment. Marcus Chen looked so ordinary. He was not tall like the warriors of her people. He had no bright scales or sharp claws. His skin was plain brown and his eyes were dark and quiet. There were no battle scars on his body, no medals on his simple gray suit, nothing that showed he was special in any way. The wedding ceremony was almost over. Thousands of Veiltar citizens watched from the crystal seats that rose high around them. Their scales shimmered in the light of 3 suns that shone through the dome above. Everyone was quiet and respectful, but Zarathel could feel their confusion. Why had their princess married this small, weak human? The answer was politics. Her father, Emperor Kethavar, had explained it to her 3 months ago. The Galactic Consortium wanted all member species to show unity. The easiest way to do this was through marriage between important families. Humans were the newest members of the consortium, and they were also the safest choice. They are not dangerous, her father had said, his golden scales rippling with amusement. Humans barely know how to travel between stars. They have no great armies or powerful weapons. Their planet is small and far away. This marriage will make the consortium happy, but it will not threaten our power in any way. Now, as the high priest finished the ancient words that bound them together, Zarathel looked at Marcus again. He stood straight and calm, but she could see that he was nervous. His hands were steady, but there was sweat on his forehead. When their eyes met, he smiled at her. It was a gentle smile, not the fierce grin of a warrior or the proud smirk of a noble. Just gentle. The priest raised his clawed hands to the dome above. By the light of the 3 suns, I declare you bound in marriage. Princess Zarathel, daughter of the Golden Throne and Marcus Chen of the world called Earth. The crowd erupted in traditional celebration calls. Zarathel's throat sacs inflated as she joined the sound, a deep thrumming that made the crystal walls vibrate. Marcus just stood there looking a little overwhelmed by the noise. When she touched his arm to guide him through the next part of the ceremony, she felt how soft his skin was. No protective scales, no hard muscle underneath. How did humans survive on their world if they were this fragile? The celebration feast lasted 6 hours. Marcus sat beside her at the high table, eating carefully and watching everything with curious eyes. He asked questions about the food, about the music, about the meaning of different ceremonial dances. His questions were smart, but they were the questions of someone who studied things in books, not someone who lived them. What does that gesture mean? He asked, pointing to where 2 young Veiltar males were touching claws in a specific pattern. It is a challenge ritual, Zarathel explained. They are deciding who gets to court the female with the silver scales. Marcus nodded and watched the ritual with the same careful attention he gave everything else. Are they related to any noble families? Zarathel blinked in surprise. It was a good question, one that showed he understood that politics mattered even in courtship rituals. The one on the left is the son of Admiral Vextar. The other one is from a merchant family, but they control the spice trade from the outer moons. So the Admiral's son has military backing, but the merchant's son has economic power. Interesting. Marcus took a sip of the ceremonial wine and continued watching. What happens if the female chooses neither of them? That was also a good question. Zarathel found herself explaining Veiltar customs in more detail than she had planned. Marcus listened to everything, asked follow-up questions that showed he was really thinking about what she said and never interrupted her. It was pleasant, talking to someone who actually wanted to learn. When the feast finally ended, they walked together to the royal quarters. Marcus would live with her now, in the princess's wing of the palace. As they walked through corridors lined with the portraits of her ancestors, Zarathel tried to imagine what her life would be like now. Marcus would probably spend his days reading in the library or attending cultural events. Maybe he would write reports about Veiltar society to send back to Earth. He seemed like the type of person who enjoyed quiet, scholarly work. That was fine with her. She had her own duties as princess, military training, diplomatic meetings, court ceremonies. They could live parallel lives in the same space. Their quarters were enormous by human standards, but normal for Veiltar royalty. High ceilings, wide rooms, and large windows that looked out over the capital city. Marcus walked around slowly, taking in every detail. He stopped at a window that showed the military training grounds below. "Your soldiers train very hard," he said, watching a group of warriors practice with energy weapons. "The galaxy is dangerous," Zarathel replied. "We must be ready to defend ourselves." Marcus nodded, but he kept watching the training session. His eyes followed the movements of the soldiers, the patterns of their exercises, the way their commanders organized them into different formations. Again, Zarathel was surprised by how carefully he observed everything. "Do humans have armies?" she asked. "We have some military forces," Marcus said. His voice was casual, but something in his tone made her look at him more closely. "Nothing like this, of course. We're still learning how galactic warfare works." That made sense. Humans had only joined the consortium 5 years ago. Before that, they had been stuck on their one small planet, fighting little wars among themselves. The idea of space battles and planet-killing weapons was probably still new and frightening to them. Over the next few weeks, Zarathel settled into a routine with her new husband. Marcus was polite and respectful, but not demanding. He spent his mornings in the palace library, reading everything he could find about Veiltar history. In the afternoons, he would walk through the gardens or visit different parts of the city. Sometimes he would attend cultural events with her, sitting quietly and observing. He never complained about anything. When the food was too spicy for human taste, he just drank more water. When the gravity was a little too heavy for his lighter human bones, he just moved more slowly. When the other nobles ignored him or spoke to him like he was a child, he just smiled and answered their questions patiently. Zarathel began to feel a little sorry for him. It could not be easy to be so far from home, surrounded by aliens who saw him as weak and unimportant. She started making an effort to include him in more conversations, to explain things he might not understand, to make sure he felt welcome. Marcus seemed to appreciate this. He would ask her about military tactics, about the different noble families, about the history of conflicts between Veiltar and other species. His questions were always thoughtful, and he remembered everything she told him. Sometimes she caught him making notes in a small device that he said was a cultural journal for his reports to Earth. "You're very interested in our military history," she observed one evening as they shared dinner in their quarters. Marcus looked up from his food. "It's fascinating, the way your people adapted to different types of warfare as you encountered new species. The tactical innovations, the technological developments. It tells a story about how civilizations grow and change." "You sound like a scholar," Zarathel said. "I suppose I am in a way." Marcus smiled. "I studied history and cultural anthropology before I became a diplomatic attaché. Understanding how different societies work helps me do my job better." That made sense. Zarathel nodded and went back to her meal. But later, as she lay in bed, she found herself thinking about some of the questions Marcus had asked. They were very specific questions. Questions about supply lines and communication systems. Questions about how Veiltar forces coordinated with allies. Questions about weaknesses in their traditional battle formations. She told herself she was being paranoid. Marcus was just curious about everything, and military matters were an important part of any civilization's culture. There was nothing suspicious about a cultural attaché wanting to understand how Veiltar society was organized. But as she drifted off to sleep, Zarathel couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus Chen was more than he appeared to be. The quiet human who seemed so gentle and scholarly was watching everything with very careful eyes. And his questions, while always polite, were exactly the kinds of questions that someone would ask if they wanted to understand not just Veiltar culture, but Veiltar capabilities. She decided she was overthinking things. Tomorrow would bring new responsibilities, new ceremonies, new diplomatic challenges. Marcus would continue his quiet studies and she would continue her duties as princess. Their arranged marriage would serve its political purpose, and perhaps in time, they might even become friends. Princess Zarathel had no idea that everything she thought she knew about her ordinary human husband was about to change forever. 3 months after her wedding, Princess Zarathel was traveling to the Cordon Trade Summit when everything changed. She sat in the main cabin of the diplomatic transport ship, reading reports about mineral rights negotiations. Marcus was across from her, quietly working on his cultural notes. The trip to the Cordon system would take 2 days, and she was glad for the time to prepare. Captain Thexor, the head of her security detail, was a veteran warrior with dark green scales and scars from 3 different wars. He had been protecting the royal family for 15 years. His team of 12 guards were all experienced soldiers who had trained together for months before this mission. The attack came without warning. Alarms suddenly screamed through the ship as energy blasts rocked the hull. Zarathel grabbed onto her chair as the transport shook violently. Emergency lights bathed everything in red as the main power flickered. Pirates, Captain Thexor shouted into his communicator. 3 ships attacking from multiple vectors. They have military-grade weapons. Zarathel felt her heart racing. Pirates were common in this sector, but they usually attacked cargo ships, not diplomatic vessels. This was either very bad luck or someone had given them information about her travel route. She looked at Marcus, expecting to see fear on his face. Instead, she saw something that surprised her. Marcus was completely calm. He had put away his notes and was listening to the sounds of the battle with focused attention. His head was tilted slightly as if he was analyzing what he heard. When another energy blast hit the ship, he didn't flinch. He just nodded slightly like he was confirming something. "Captain," Marcus said, standing up. His voice was different now. Not the gentle, scholarly tone she was used to, but something sharper and more direct. "What's your tactical assessment?" Captain Thexor looked at Marcus with irritation. "Sir, please stay seated." "We'll handle this." "Captain," Marcus said again. And this time there was something in his voice that made the veteran warrior pause. "I asked for your tactical assessment. How many hostiles? What's their formation? What weapons are they using?" Thexor hesitated, then answered. 3 ships. Light cruisers, probably modified cargo vessels. They're using coordinated attack patterns, coming at us from different angles to overwhelm our shields. Standard pirate tactics, but well executed." Marcus nodded. "Are they jamming communications?" "Yes, sir. We can't call for help." "Good. That means they're planning to board us, not destroy us. They want prisoners or cargo." Marcus walked to the tactical display screen. "Show me their attack pattern." Zarathel watched in amazement as Captain Thexor actually obeyed. The display showed 3 red dots circling their ship, firing in sequence to keep their shields under constant pressure. Marcus studied the pattern for maybe 10 seconds, then pointed to different parts of the screen. "They're good, but they're making 3 mistakes," Marcus said. His voice was crisp and confident, like he had done this many times before. "First, they're staying too close together. Second, they're focusing all their fire on the shields instead of targeting specific systems. Third, they're maintaining a predictable rotation pattern." "So?" Thexor asked. But Zarathel could hear that he was listening carefully now. "So we can use those mistakes against them." Marcus turned to face the captain. "Do you have any concussion missiles?" 2 of them, but they're short range." "Perfect. Here's what we're going to do." Marcus pointed at the screen again. "In 43 seconds, ship number 2 will be in the optimal firing position. You're going to drop the rear shields for exactly 2 seconds and fire both missiles at ship number 1. "That's insane," Thexor protested. "Dropping the shields will let them hit our engines." "No, it won't. Ship number 2 will be blocked by ship number 3 for exactly those 2 seconds. Ship number 1 will try to evade the missiles and break formation. When they do, you hit them with everything you have." "How do you know the timing that precisely?" Zarathel asked. She was staring at Marcus like she had never seen him before. Marcus looked at her, and for a moment his expression softened. "I've been watching their pattern. It's very consistent." Then he turned back to Thexor. "Captain, we don't have time to debate this. 32 seconds. Something in Marcus's voice made the decision for Thexor. "All weapons, target ship number 1. Prepare concussion missiles. Stand by to drop rear shields on my mark." Zarathel held her breath as she watched the tactical display. The 3 pirate ships continued their attack pattern, unaware that anything had changed. Marcus was counting quietly under his breath. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. Zarathel could see ship number 2 moving into position just like Marcus had predicted. 4, 3, 2. "Mark, the rear shields dropped." 2 missiles shot out toward ship number 1. For exactly 2 seconds, their transport was vulnerable. Then the shields came back up, just as ship number 2 came around and fired at where their engines should have been. Ship number 1 tried to dodge the missiles, just like Marcus had said they would. They broke formation, moving away from their coordinated attack pattern. The moment they did, Thexor fired everything they had. The pirate ship exploded in a brilliant flash of light. The other 2 ships suddenly found themselves out of position, their careful attack pattern ruined. They tried to regroup, but now they were confused and defensive instead of aggressive. Now what? Thexor asked, looking at Marcus with new respect. Now we run, Marcus said. They'll try to pursue, but they've lost their coordination. Set course for the nearest patrol station. Vary your speed every 30 seconds to make it harder for them to predict our movements. The escape worked perfectly. The two remaining pirate ships tried to follow, but without their third ship and their coordinated pattern, they couldn't match the speed and maneuverability of the diplomatic transport. Within an hour, they had given up the chase. As the all-clear signal sounded through the ship, Zarathel sat in stunned silence. She looked at Marcus, who was calmly sitting back down and picking up his notes as if nothing had happened. But everything had happened. Everything had changed, Marcus, she said quietly.
How did you know to do all that?
He looked up from his notes with that same gentle smile she was used to. I've read a lot about space combat tactics. Theoretical knowledge, mostly. I guess I was lucky that it actually worked in practice. But Zarathel had seen his face during the battle. That wasn't theoretical knowledge. That was the face of someone who had commanded in combat before. Someone who had made life-and-death decisions and lived with the consequences. Someone who moved and spoke like a trained military officer. Captain Thexor, she called out. A word with you, please. The veteran warrior came over, his expression thoughtful. Zarathel lowered her voice so Marcus couldn't hear. What did you think of my husband's tactical advice? Thexor glanced at Marcus, then back at her. Princess, that was not the advice of a scholar. That was the planning of someone with real combat experience. The timing, the understanding of enemy psychology, the way he read their formation. I've never seen anything like it from a civilian. What are you saying? I'm saying that your husband either has the most detailed theoretical knowledge I've ever encountered, or he's had military training that's not in his official records. Thexor paused. And Princess? The way he gave orders. My soldiers obeyed him without question. That kind of command presence doesn't come from reading books. Zarathel felt a chill run through her scales. She looked at Marcus again. He was still working on his notes, looking exactly like the quiet cultural attaché she had married. But now she noticed things she had missed before. The way he sat with perfect posture, the way his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, the way he had positioned himself in the cabin so he could see both the door and the tactical display. Marcus, she said, walking back to her seat. I'm curious about something. What exactly did you study on Earth before you became a cultural attaché? He looked up with that same gentle expression. History and anthropology, like I mentioned. I was particularly interested in how different cultures developed their military traditions. And where did you study? A small university. You probably haven't heard of it. Marcus smiled. Why do you ask? Just curious about my husband's background. Zarathel tried to keep her voice casual. Have you ever had any military training? Basic service like most humans. Nothing special. Marcus went back to his notes. I'm glad my theoretical knowledge was helpful today. But as Zarathel watched him write, she noticed something else. The way he held his stylus. The careful, precise movements. The habit of pausing to listen whenever footsteps passed by their cabin. These were not the habits of a scholar. That night, as they prepared for sleep in their separate beds, Zarathel found herself studying Marcus more carefully than ever before. He moved through his evening routine with quiet efficiency. Everything he did was purposeful, economical, precise, like someone who had learned to waste no motion, no time, no energy. Marcus, she said as he was settling into bed, thank you for today. You saved our lives. He turned to look at her, and for just a moment she saw something different in his eyes. Something deeper and more complex than the gentle scholar she thought she knew. You're welcome, Zarathel. I'm glad. Everyone is safe. As Marcus turned off his reading light in the cab after the pirate attack, Princess Zarathel could not stop thinking about Marcus. She watched him during meals, during their walks through the palace gardens, during the formal ceremonies they attended together. The more she observed, the more convinced she became that her husband was not what he seemed. She began investigating quietly. The palace library had extensive records of all diplomatic personnel, including detailed background checks. Marcus Chen's file was exactly what she expected. Born on Earth in the city of San Francisco, educated at something called UC Berkeley, graduate degrees in history and anthropology, 3 years of experience in cultural exchange programs before his appointment as a diplomatic attaché. But Zarathel had learned to read between the lines of official documents. There were small gaps in Marcus's timeline. 3 months here, 6 months there, where his activities were described in very general terms. Advanced training in cultural sensitivity, specialized, education in interspecies communication. Field, work in diplomatic protocols. She also noticed that Marcus's academic work was impressive but strangely focused. His papers were about military history, strategic planning, and what humans called asymmetric warfare. For someone who claimed to be interested in culture, he spent a lot of time studying how smaller forces defeated larger ones. Zarathel began testing him with casual questions. During breakfast, she would mention problems with trade routes or border disputes with neighboring systems. Marcus always had thoughtful responses, but his suggestions were remarkably sophisticated. He understood supply chain vulnerabilities, communication weaknesses, and strategic choke points with an expert's precision. "You know a lot about military logistics for a cultural specialist," she said one morning as they shared tea. Marcus smiled that gentle smile she was learning to distrust. History is mostly about resources and movements. How armies were fed, how information traveled, how supplies were protected. You can't understand a culture without understanding how they organized themselves for survival. It was a reasonable answer, but Zarathel noticed that Marcus never gave simple answers anymore. Everything he said was careful, measured, designed to reveal just enough to satisfy curiosity without giving away real information. 2 weeks after the pirate attack, her investigation was interrupted by urgent news. A Krexhun battle fleet had arrived at the edge of Veiltar space. The Krexhun were the most feared military force in the galaxy, apex predators who had conquered dozens of worlds. They were demanding the surrender of 3 Veiltar colonies in the outer systems. The Royal Council met in emergency session. Emperor Kethvar, Zarathel's father, looked older than she had ever seen him. The golden scales around his eyes were dull with worry. Around the great circular table, the most powerful nobles and military leaders of the Empire argued about their options. "We cannot fight them," Admiral Vextar said, his scarred claws clicking nervously on the table. "The Krexhun have 12 heavy battleships. We have 6, and ours are older designs. They could take our outer colonies, and we couldn't stop them. If we give them the outer colonies, they'll just demand more next year," argued General Quastel. "The Krexhun never stop with their first demand. They test, they take, they test again. Then what do you suggest?" the Emperor asked. "We fight a war we cannot win? We sacrifice millions of lives for pride?" The debate went in circles for hours. Surrender meant accepting defeat and probably facing more demands later. Fighting meant certain military disaster. There seemed to be no good choices. Zarathel sat quietly through most of the discussion, but her mind was working. When the council finally took a break, she approached her father privately. "I want to bring Marcus to the next session." Emperor Kethvar looked surprised. "Your human husband, why?" "He has insights about military strategy that might be helpful." Zarathel chose her words carefully. "Remember, humans are new to galactic politics. Sometimes an outside perspective can see solutions that we miss." Her father considered this. "The council won't like it. They barely tolerate him at formal ceremonies." "Then don't tell them he's advising. Tell them he's observing for the humans. They might want to know how the Krexhun threat affects human interests." When the council reconvened, Marcus sat quietly in a chair along the wall, officially present as an observer for human diplomatic interests. Most of the council members ignored him completely. Admiral Vextar actually turned his back to avoid looking at the weak human. But Zarathel watched Marcus carefully. He was studying everything: the tactical displays showing Krexhun fleet positions, the star charts of the disputed systems, the casualty estimates from previous Krexhun conflicts. His eyes moved constantly, taking in every piece of information. After 2 more hours of debate, the council was no closer to a solution. That's when Zarathel decided to take a risk. "Father, may I ask our human observer a question?" The Emperor nodded, though several council members made sounds of irritation. "Marcus, you've been listening to our discussion. Do humans have any experience with situations like this?" Marcus stood up slowly. When he spoke, his voice was respectful but confident. "Your Majesty, humans have faced many situations where a smaller force had to deal with a larger, more powerful enemy. Sometimes the solution isn't to match strength with strength." "What do you mean?" General Quastel asked, his tone suggesting that he didn't expect much from a human. Marcus walked to the tactical display. "May I?" When the Emperor nodded, Marcus began pointing to different parts of the star chart. The Krexhun are powerful, but power creates its own weaknesses. They're used to intimidating enemies into surrender. They're used to quick, decisive victories. They're not used to long, complicated conflicts. So, Admiral Vexistar said dismissively, we still can't match their fleet strength. You don't need to match their fleet strength, Marcus replied. You need to make this conflict too expensive and too unpredictable for them to continue. He touched the display, highlighting the trade routes that passed through Krexhun space. Look at their supply lines. Look at their communication networks. Look at their recent expansion pattern. For the next 30 minutes, Marcus gave the most detailed military analysis that Zarathel had ever heard. He identified 17 different vulnerabilities in Krexhun operations. He explained how to disrupt their logistics without engaging their main fleet. He outlined a strategy that would make the conquest of Veiltar colonies so difficult and expensive that the Krexhun would eventually give up and look for easier targets. The entire council sat in stunned silence. This wasn't the theoretical knowledge of a scholar. This was the detailed operational planning of someone who understood warfare at the highest levels. Marcus knew Krexhun doctrine better than their own intelligence officers did. He had identified weaknesses that their military experts had missed. How do you know all this? Admiral Vextar asked. His voice was no longer dismissive. It was carefully controlled, like someone trying not to show how impressed he was. Marcus smiled that same gentle smile, but now Zarathel could see the calculation behind it. Humans are very good at studying other species. It's how we learn to interact with different cultures. The Krexhun have been expanding for centuries, so there's a lot of historical data to analyze. You analyzed all this from historical data? General Quastel asked. Humans are very thorough researchers, Marcus replied. We like to understand how things work. But Zarathel saw something in Marcus's expression that the others missed. The analysis he had just given wasn't based on historical research. It was based on current intelligence, real-time information about Krexhun operations, fleet movements, and strategic planning. Information that could only come from active military intelligence gathering. After the council session ended, Zarathel walked with Marcus back to their quarters. Neither of them spoke until they were alone. Then she turned to face him directly. Marcus, I need you to tell me the truth. Who are you, really? For a long moment, Marcus just looked at her. Then something changed in his expression. The gentle, scholarly mask slipped just a little, and she saw the man underneath. Someone harder, more focused, more dangerous than the cultural attaché she had married. I'm exactly who I said I am, he said quietly. But I'm also someone else, someone I hoped I wouldn't have to be while I was here. What does that mean? Marcus was quiet for a long time. Then he said, it means that humans aren't what the galaxy thinks we are, and it means that if the Krexhun push this conflict, they're going to learn something about humanity that will surprise them. Are you going to tell me what that is? Marcus looked out the window at the three suns setting over the capital city. I hope I don't have to, but if the Krexhun attack your people, then yes, you'll see exactly what humans really are. That night, Zarathel lay awake thinking about everything she had learned. Marcus wasn't just hiding his own identity. He was hiding the identity of his entire species. Humans had been presenting themselves as weak and primitive, but Marcus's knowledge suggested something very different. If humans really were as harmless as they seemed, how did Marcus know so much about advanced military strategy? How did he have current intelligence about Krexhun operations? How could he devise Campion fell into dark? The Krexhun ultimatum arrived 3 days later. Princess Zarathel stood beside her father in the royal communications chamber as the message played on the main screen. The Krexhun commander was exactly what she expected. Massive, covered in dark scales, with eyes like black stones and teeth like curved blades. Veiltar Empire, the commander said in a voice like grinding metal. I am war leader Thaxnok of the Krexhun Dominion. You have 48 hours to evacuate your colonies in the outer ring systems. After that time, we will take them by force. Any resistance will result in the total destruction of your military forces and the enslavement of your civilian population. The message ended with a display of the Krexhun battle fleet. 12 enormous warships, each one larger than anything in the Veiltar Navy. Their weapons could crack planets and their shields could deflect the combined firepower of entire enemy fleets. The message was clear: surrender or be destroyed. Emperor Kethvar looked older than ever. 48 hours. Not even enough time to evacuate the civilian populations properly. Father, Zarathel said quietly, we need to talk to Marcus, the human. Zarathel, this is not the time for academic discussions. Trust me, Father. Please. An hour later, Zarathel sat with Marcus in their private chambers. She had dismissed all the guards and activated the privacy shields that would prevent anyone from listening to their conversation. Marcus looked calm, but she could see tension in the way he held his shoulders. The Krexhun are attacking, she said without introduction. In 48 hours, they'll start destroying everything my people have built in the outer systems. And after that, they'll come for the core worlds. Marcus nodded. I know. You said that if they attacked, I would see what humans really are. I'm ready to see that now. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up and walked to a wall panel that Zarathel had never seen him use before. He pressed his hand against it, and she heard a soft beep as it scanned his palm print. A hidden compartment opened, revealing a communication device unlike anything she had ever seen. Zarathel, Marcus said, turning to face her. My real name is Colonel Marcus Chen, Terran Strategic Intelligence. I'm not a cultural attaché. I'm a military intelligence officer, and I've been stationed here to monitor potential threats to human interests in this sector. She stared at him. Colonel? The marriage was real, Marcus said quickly. My feelings for you are real, but my presence here was part of a larger strategic operation. What kind of operation? Marcus activated the communication device. For the past century, humanity has been preparing for the day when we would need to defend ourselves or our allies in galactic space. We've been studying every major military power, mapping their capabilities, identifying their weaknesses. Every human diplomat, trader, or cultural worker in the galaxy is actually gathering intelligence. You've been spying on everyone. We've been learning. Humans have one great advantage in this galaxy. Everyone underestimates us. They see us as primitive, weak, technologically backward. That gives us the perfect cover to observe and prepare. The communication device chimed softly. A voice spoke from it in rapid, clipped tones that sounded like military radio traffic. Colonel Chen, this is Admiral Zhang aboard TFS Invisible Hand. We've been monitoring the Krexhun ultimatum. Are you ready to initiate Protocol 7? Stand by, Admiral. Marcus looked at Zarathel. Protocol 7 is our response plan for a Krexhun expansion into this sector. We've been gaming this scenario for 30 years. 30 years? But humans have only been in galactic space for 5 years. Marcus smiled, but it wasn't his gentle scholar's smile anymore. This was the smile of someone who had been planning a very long game. Humans have been in galactic space much longer than anyone knows. We've been watching, learning, and preparing. The public first contact 5 years ago was just when we decided to reveal ourselves officially. How long have you really been here? Long enough to map every major trade route, identify the command structure of every significant military force, and place intelligence assets throughout the galaxy. Marcus spoke into the communicator. Admiral, the Princess is cleared for this briefing. Initiate full tactical display. The air above the communication device shimmered, and suddenly Zarathel was looking at a 3-dimensional map of the entire local sector. It showed the positions of the Krexhun fleet, the Veiltar defensive positions, and something else that made her breath catch in her throat. Human ships. Dozens of them, positioned throughout the sector in places where no one would think to look. They were running silent, invisible to normal sensors, but the tactical display showed them clearly. Fast attack cruisers, electronic warfare vessels, and several massive ships that she didn't recognize. How many ships do you have? She whispered. In this sector. 43 vessels.
Throughout the galaxy?
More than enough. The voice from the communicator belonged to Admiral Zhang. Princess Zarathel, we've been monitoring the Krexhun expansion for decades. We know their doctrine, their tactics, their supply systems, and their command structure better than they do. But why hide all this? Why pretend to be weak? Marcus answered. Because openly challenging established powers leads to war. Appearing weak and harmless while secretly preparing leads to victory. Humans learned long ago that the most dangerous enemy is the one you don't see coming. Admiral Zhang's voice continued. The Krexhun think they're attacking a weak species that can't fight back. They have no idea that we've been studying them for decades. We know exactly how their fleet commanders think, how their logistics work, and how to exploit every weakness in their battle doctrine. Show her the intelligence reports, Marcus said. The tactical display changed. showing detailed information about every ship in the Krexhun fleet, not just their positions and capabilities, but their command staff, their recent maintenance records, their fuel levels, even the psychological profiles of their senior officers. War leader Thaxnok is aggressive but predictable, Admiral Zhang explained. He favors direct frontal assaults with overwhelming firepower. He doesn't adapt well to unexpected tactical situations. His supply officer is corrupt and has been skimming fuel for the black market. His communications officer has a gambling addiction that makes him vulnerable to bribes. You know all this how? Because we've had people working in Krexhun space for 20 years, Marcus said. Mechanics, food suppliers, entertainment workers, information brokers. Humans who look harmless and ask innocent questions and remember everything they see. Zarathel felt like the universe was reshaping itself around her. What are you asking me to do? We're asking you to trust us, Marcus said. The Krexhun think they're about to conquer some outer colonies and intimidate a weaker species. Instead, they're about to discover that they've attacked the allies of the most dangerous intelligence operation in the galaxy. Admiral Zhang, Zarathel said, addressing the communication device directly. What do you need from the Veiltar Empire? We need you to act exactly as the Krexhun expect you to act. Send your fleet to defend the outer colonies. Fight bravely but conventionally. Give them the kind of resistance they're used to dealing with. And trust us to handle the rest. What rest? Marcus looked at the tactical display, where the positions of human ships formed a complex pattern around the Krexhun fleet. The rest is what happens when the Krexhun discover that their fuel supplies have been contaminated. Their communications are being jammed. Their supply convoys are disappearing, and their tactical information is completely wrong. We're going to fight them? We're going to destroy them, Admiral Zhang said simply. Not with superior firepower, but with superior intelligence. They'll never see us coming until it's too late to matter. Zarathel looked at Marcus, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not the gentle scholar she had married, but a military officer who had been preparing for this moment for years. Someone who represented a species that had been playing a much deeper game than anyone in the galaxy had imagined. Marcus, she said quietly, are you really my husband, or are you just an intelligence officer doing his job? He stepped closer to her, and when he spoke, his voice was soft and sincere. I'm both. I came here as an intelligence officer, but I fell in love with you as a man. That's why I'm willing to reveal everything we've been hiding, because you and your people matter to me, and I won't let the Krexhun destroy what we've built together. Zarathel made her decision. What do you need me to tell my father? Tell him that humanity is ready to honor our alliance, Marcus said. And tell him that the Krexhun are about to learn why it's dangerous to threaten the friends of humans. As Admiral Zhang began outlining the tactical plan, Princess Zarathel realized that her ordinary human husband was about to draw out the true power of his species. The galaxy was about to discover that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their ships. It was their ability to plan, to watch, to learn, and to strike when their enemies least expected it. The Krexhun thought they were attacking a weak ally of a primitive species. Instead, they were about to face the most sophisticated intelligence operation the galaxy had ever seen. And Marcus Chen, the quiet cultural attaché who asked so many thoughtful questions, was about to show everyone exactly what humans could do when they stopped pretending to be harmless. The battle began exactly as Admiral Zhang had predicted. The Krexhun fleet moved toward the outer colonies with overwhelming confidence, expecting the Veiltar forces to either flee or die quickly. War leader Thaxnok had conquered 17 worlds using the same tactics, and he saw no reason why this would be different. Princess Zarathel watched from the command center of the Veiltar flagship as their fleet took position around the colony of Keftar Prime, 6 Veiltar battleships, against 12 Krexhun warships. On paper, it was a hopeless fight. But Marcus stood beside her, calm and confident, speaking quietly into his communication device. All human units, this is Colonel Chen. Operation Nightfall is now active. Execute Protocol 7. For the first hour, the battle looked exactly like every other Krexhun victory. Their massive ships hammered the Veiltar defenses with overwhelming firepower. Admiral Vextar fought brilliantly, but his ships were outgunned and outnumbered. It seemed like only a matter of time before the colonies would fall. Then strange things began to happen. The Krexhun fleet's communications started experiencing interference. Not the kind of jamming that military forces expected and could compensate for, but subtle distortions that made orders unclear and created confusion between ships. War leader Thaxnok found himself repeating commands and growing frustrated with his officers. At the same time, 3 Krexhun supply ships that were supposed to arrive with ammunition and fuel simply disappeared. They had been traveling through empty space on a routine route, but they never reached the battle zone. The fleet's logistics officer reported that all communication with the supply convoy had been lost. "Sir," the logistics officer reported to Thaxnok, "we're also detecting fuel contamination in our reserves. It's some kind of nanovirus that's breaking down the molecular structure of our fuel cells." "How is that possible?" Thaxnok roared. "We've been in empty space for weeks." The logistics officer had no answer. He didn't know that human agents had infiltrated the fuel depot 3 months ago, or that the nanovirus had been designed to activate only when exposed to the specific energy signatures of Krexhun weapon systems. As the battle continued, more problems emerged. The Krexhun targeting systems began experiencing random failures. Their sensor arrays started reporting false readings. Critical ship systems suffered mysterious malfunctions that forced crews to perform emergency repairs in the middle of combat. "Status report," Thaxnok demanded from his command chair. "We're experiencing coordinated system failures across the fleet," his tactical officer reported. "It's like someone has detailed knowledge of our technical specifications and is exploiting every vulnerability we have." That was exactly what was happening. For 20 years, human intelligence operatives had been working in Krexhun space, learning every detail of their technology. They knew which systems were vulnerable to electromagnetic interference, which computer networks could be infiltrated, and which components would fail if subjected to specific frequencies of disruption. But the Krexhun still had superior numbers and firepower. Even with all their technical problems, they were slowly pushing back the Veiltar fleet. That's when Marcus spoke into his communicator with 2 simple words: "Execute revelation." All around the Krexhun fleet, space began to shimmer. Dozens of human ships dropped their stealth systems and became visible. They had been there all along, silent and invisible, positioned perfectly to attack from every direction at once. The human ships were smaller than the Krexhun warships, but they moved with incredible speed and precision. They struck at exactly the right targets at exactly the right moments. While the Krexhun were distracted by their failing systems and confused by their communication problems, the humans attacked their most vulnerable points: unknown vessels. Thaxnok shouted at his communications officer. "Identify those ships." "Sir, they're human ships." "But that's impossible. Humans don't have this kind of technology." Admiral Zhang's voice came over the open communication channels, broadcast so that every ship in both fleets could hear it. "War leader Thaxnok, this is Admiral Zhang of the Terran Space Force. You are attacking allies of humanity. Stand down immediately or face the consequences." "Humans," Thaxnok laughed, a sound like grinding stone. "You think your primitive species can threaten the Krexhun Dominion?" "War leader," Admiral Zhang replied calmly, "we've been studying your military doctrine for 30 years. We know every tactic you've ever used, every weakness in your command structure, and every vulnerability in your technology. We know about your corrupt supply officer, your gambling-addicted communications specialist, and your tactical officer's tendency to panic under pressure. We know because we've been watching you." The precision of the information was terrifying. Thaxnok looked around his command center, suddenly realizing that someone had been gathering intelligence about his most trusted officers. "How do you know these things?" "Because humans are very good at appearing harmless while learning everything we need to know," Admiral Zhang answered. "For example, we know that your flagship's main power coupling has a design flaw that makes it vulnerable to cascading feedback. Would you like us to demonstrate?" Before Thaxnok could respond, his ship shuddered as multiple human vessels targeted his power systems with precisely calibrated energy pulses. The lights flickered, the artificial gravity fluctuated, and several control panels exploded in showers of sparks. "That was a warning shot," Admiral Zhang said. "The next one will disable your ship permanently. Order your fleet to withdraw, or we will destroy you." Thaxnok was a veteran warrior who had never retreated from any battle. But he was also intelligent enough to recognize when he was completely outmatched. The humans had turned his tactical advantages into disadvantages, his superior numbers into a liability. and his careful planning into a trap. "How long have you been planning this?" he asked. "Since the day we learned about the Krexhund Dominion," Admiral Zhang replied. "Humans don't start fights, war leader, but we always finish them." Around the Krexhund fleet, more human ships continued to appear. They had been hidden in asteroid fields behind moons and in the empty spaces between star systems. All of them perfectly positioned, all of them ready to strike. The Krexhund found themselves surrounded by an enemy they had never seen coming. "All Krexhund vessels, this is War Leader Thaxnok," he said finally. "Withdraw to the edge of the system. We are reassessing our strategic position." As the Krexhund fleet began its retreat, Princess Zarathel watched in amazement. The most feared military force in the galaxy was running from a species that everyone thought was primitive and harmless. She looked at Marcus, seeing him clearly for the first time. "How many other species know the truth about humanity?" she asked. "None of them," Marcus replied. "You're the first. We've been very careful to maintain our image as a weak, primitive species while we learned everything we needed to know about galactic civilization. Why reveal yourselves now?" Marcus looked at her with an expression of genuine love and affection. "Because the Krexhund threatened you, and because I've learned that some things are more important than maintaining strategic advantages." Admiral Zhang's voice came through the communicator one more time. "Colonel Chen, the Krexhund fleet is withdrawing beyond sensor range. Operation Nightfall is complete. All human vessels are returning to stealth mode." Within minutes, the human ships vanished again, disappearing into the darkness of space as if they had never been there. Only the Veiltar fleet remained, victorious against impossible odds. "Marcus," Zarathel said quietly, "what happens now? Will you go back to pretending to be a cultural attaché?" "That depends on you," he replied. "And on your father. Humanity has revealed our true capabilities to save your people. Now we need to decide what kind of relationship we want to have going forward." "What are you proposing?" "A real alliance. Not the political marriage that brought us together, but a genuine partnership between species who trust each other. We'll share our intelligence capabilities with the Veiltar Empire, and in return you'll help us maintain the security of this sector." Zarathel considered this. "And personally, what happens to our marriage?" Marcus stepped closer to her. "That's up to you. I came here as an intelligence officer, but I fell in love with you as a man. I want to be your husband, not just your ally. But I understand if learning the truth changes how you feel about me." Princess Zarathel looked into Marcus's eyes and saw the same gentleness that had first attracted her to him. But now she also saw the strength, intelligence, and capability that he had been hiding. The quiet scholar was still there, but he was also a military officer who had helped plan one of the most sophisticated operations she had ever witnessed. "I fell in love with the man who asked thoughtful questions and listened to my answers," she said. "That man is still you, even if you're also someone more dangerous and more important than I realized. So what does this mean for us?" Zarathel smiled, feeling more proud of her husband than she had ever imagined possible. "It means that I married someone even more remarkable than I knew. And it means that our children will grow up in